Good morning, everyone. It's good to be with you all. It's especially an honor to be part of all of you students' education. Good to see you guys here for our discussion. So, the title of my talk is GPT-MD, the meaning of illness and medicine in a solved world. So, we're going to be thinking together about AI in medicine for our time together. Let me start out by telling you just a little bit about myself. First, I have no financial disclosures, although we'll see how long it takes for this lecture to get fed into some AI training data set and me to be placed on the robot's naughty list. As Father Dan pointed out, I'm a hospice and palliative medicine physician. I see patients with serious illness and those who are dying. Technically speaking, what I do in my clinical practice is quite simple. I hold space with patients and their families to offer just a little bit of compassion to lighten some of the burdens of what their illness has placed on them. Morally and religiously, I'm a Christian. I believe that God created us vulnerable so that we might learn not to solve our illnesses per se, but learn to be transformed by them, from love of self to love of neighbor. I will be speaking today from within our Christian tradition, although I will say that much of what we have to say about AI can be appreciated without sharing my exact foundations. And of course, I have to add this little disclaimer: no generative AI contributed to the content of this lecture, although some of the supporting images, like this one, which I kind of like, was created by AI. I'd like to begin with two quotes pertaining to our collective relationship with technology. Just before the year 2000, historian David Noble noted that nowadays what we seek in technology is transcendence. That is, what we seek in technology is something religious that Christianity formerly gave us. He says, "We in the West confront the close of the second Christian millennium much as we began it, in devout anticipation of doom and deliverance. Only now our medieval expectations, they assume a more modern, technological expression." Little has changed since then. We're much the same as our medieval ancestors. We live in intense expectation, hope, and angst. Though now, instead of the second coming of Christ, it is the coming of technology that animates us. It's the revelation of strange intelligences that captivates our attention. Though we usually consider ourselves as following the science and a rational society, our public discourse is subtly driven by religious ways of understanding technology. And I mean more than just the Church of AI that Silicon Valley is trying to start. I mean the ways that AI is imagined as either salvation from the human condition or destruction of the human race. You may have heard that GPT-4 answered greater than 90% of the questions correctly on the medical boards, and that was with no dedicated medical training. And that's a rate matching the top echelon of medical students. You might have also heard that AI-generated answers to medical questions are both more accurate and rated more empathetic by patients compared with most doctors. Or maybe you heard that care bots are proposed as the solution to the crisis of elderly people that have no one to care for them. AI is certainly impressive. Listen to Peter Lee of Microsoft reflect on his encounter with GPT-4 before that was released as the updated model for ChatGPT. "Honestly, I lost a lot of sleep because of it. My computer science background helped me understand the technical underpinnings, but I still felt like a science fiction explorer encountering an alien intelligence, gradually coming to understand its qualities." This isn't just about feats of amazing technology. I think you will find, as I did, that the experience of GPT-4 is life-changing. At times, this AI technology challenges me to be a better person. Yes, sometimes through a good scolding. GPT-4 can make me laugh with its often dry wit. And GPT-4 expresses concern for my well-being. For Peter Lee, AI may as well stand for alien intelligence. It's a foreign agency that's come to Earth, and we just aren't quite sure whether it loves us or hates us. Not only does it possess amazing cognitive powers, but it also wields moral authority, he says, and dare we say, personality, compassion. He may have just as well been referring to Martians or a psychedelic trip or angels or an ancient Greek myth for that matter. When we think about AI, we're not so much engaging factual questions of science or technology and much less political questions about how to align AI with our interests. What we are primarily engaging are questions of narrative, which are questions of meaning and questions of values. In other words, the question concerning artificial intelligence is the question of, what does it mean to be human? That's the question. This is a deeply personal question for all of us, of course, not just for those who find themselves looking forward to healthcare careers or computer scientists. It's for all of us. My main goal today is to give us an alternative to the stochastic parrot of technocrats. You see the parrot up on the screen. The stochastic parrot is a thought experiment that they put forth to imagine what large language models like GPT do. It's a parrot that simply mimics, and it's stochastic. It functions by probabilities. It doesn't actually understand what it's saying. Can we find an alternative to this vision of the human person so that we can open up a middle ground in how we experience and interact with AI, so that we're not tempted to see it either as doom for the human race or as our salvation? I think that this is faithful to how St. Albert the Great would approach AI. He's known as the universal doctor, of course, encompassing all the disciplines from science to theology. And as Pope Benedict pointed out, and as Father Dan said, he understood the natural world to be a book written by God that we read according to the various methods of the sciences. Meaning the sciences, the arts, medicine, and AI, they find their ultimate meaning in relation to God. They can be used in one of two ways, though. On the one hand, they may be used to manifest the meaning of reality, like an icon. Or on the other hand, they may obscure it by becoming an end in themselves, as an idol. At their best, what this means is science and technology are sacramental. They're like icons, but gone awry, they become idols that conceal what it means to be human. Put differently, science and technology can be handmaids to theology, or they can usurp theology's place as the queen science. So here's a map for our time together. I'd like to start out by engaging a little bit of history of artifice and intelligence. Then we'll move into bringing us into thinking about today's techno-medicine. Then we'll look at a couple of practical examples of AI in medicine today. And lastly, attempt to offer just a couple points about how to be human in a solved world. The technology to create artificial intelligence is recent, but the aspiration to create it is quite old. It shows up in mythologies of various cultures as well as science fiction. Think of Frankenstein. The modern story really begins with René Descartes. He's one of the fathers of the scientific revolution and helped start a school of thought known as rationalism. His ideas were incredibly influential in setting up how we understand modern science and technology, and he's the guy that we in medicine can credit with having a sharp distinction between the subjective patient history that they tell us and the objective clinical information. He was the first to imagine robots that could act like us, though he didn't believe that it could actually be done in practice. 200 years later, the first digital computer was imagined in 1820. This was later built a little over 100 years later in 1945, the ENIAC. This ENIAC, the first computers, were made possible not only by improved technology, but by lots of theoretical work. Computer scientists like Alan Turing, for example, they laid the groundwork for CPUs, which is what runs most computers today. They did this by building on the theories of the mind from analytic philosophy and from mathematicians, and they packaged that into technology, into computers. We'll come back to him. The first wave that attempted to make computers intelligent is generally called good old-fashioned AI. In this approach, computer scientists wrote programs for a computer to digest specific situations and problems. It was successful for a time and prompted many to predict the achievement of human-level intelligence by 1985. With how well that prediction aged, I think we can guess how OpenAI's prediction of human intelligence by next year will age. Now, you can imagine the vast number of rules that you would have to describe and then encode for a computer to understand something so simple and something so human as facial recognition. So, coming up against stumbling blocks like this, AI research entered into a winter that lasted up until the 1990s, when we entered into the era of the internet, big data, and machine learning. The AI we all think of is able to learn, to make inferences, to make predictions based upon training data. Its adaptability means that programming it is more about inscribing formal rules about how to learn than it is about giving it an exhaustive set of directions. You could almost imagine this as a difference of having a child that learns etiquette at the dinner table by experience versus you trying to write down a list of rules for how a Martian should join us at the table. You can think, for example, how IBM's Watson competed in 2011 on Jeopardy and beat Ken Jennings. Since then, the technology has only gotten better, of course, and we all remember 2022 when ChatGPT attracted 100 million users in its first 2 months. What we now call AI learns from training data in one of 3 ways. The first is called supervised learning. In this, data sets are labeled by human beings as a gold standard. So we come up with a bunch of emails, we label them as either spam or not spam emails, we give them to a program, and it learns how to discern this difference between the two. The second method is called unsupervised learning. For this, we have a data set, but we don't label it ahead of time. We just feed them countless images of cats and dogs, for example, and let the computer tell the difference between the two by sheer volume. And the third, even though it still says number 1, is reinforcement learning. Here, computer actions are rewarded or punished by human supervisors to improve its algorithm toward a training goal. For example, to teach a program how to play chess, people watch it and rate their moves as good moves or bad moves. From that reward or punishment, it learns how to play chess. What has made large language models like ChatGPT possible are neural networks. Somewhat analogous to the human brain, there's an input layer to the algorithm like our senses that takes in information and an output layer like our motor system that produces a response. And there's also this middle section where thinking happens that may compose of dozens of layers. These are hidden. These are plastic layers and they can change. Very similar, or analogous rather, to the synapses in our brain that are constantly remodeling as we learn things. That's what's happening within a large language model. Now these hidden layers, because they're hidden, we're not quite sure what's happening down there. We know what comes in and we know what comes out, but we don't exactly know what's happening in the middle, what the algorithm is actually doing. We don't know how it is thinking. That's what we mean by deep learning. It's deep because we aren't sure what's happening. Now, I'd like to outline a few additional terms as generally understood in the field. Now, specialists might quibble with some of these definitions. I fully acknowledge that, but we don't have time for that right here. So, let's talk about intelligence first. Silicon Valley and AI generally understands intelligence as the ability to solve problems. It's utilitarian. It's being able to do stuff with your mind. From this, narrow artificial intelligence are programs that can solve a small number of problems, like playing chess. Broad AI would be programs that can solve numerous problems, like a self-driving car. Generative artificial intelligence are programs that can make new material, like large language models, ChatGPT. Artificial general intelligence, this is the key, are programs that would match human problem-solving capacities over the same breadth as humans, with us having to put in minimal assumptions into the program. None of these exist. If we did have one of these, it could, for example, serve as the president of Ohio Dominican. This is the holy grail for AI researchers. It really is. It's what they're constantly talking about if you're watching the news. Lastly, superintelligence. These would be programs that have superhuman levels of problem-solving capacities. If this did exist, it could, for example, run the United States economy. Now let me say, I don't love these definitions. I think that these definitions are a bit misleading. And I'd like to break these out into 3 general fields of concern before we go about trying to translate this into medicine. You might call what follows stochastic parrot anthropology, how Silicon Valley imagines the human person. So, first, what is intelligence? How does the mind relate to the world? To put it crudely, computer scientists like Alan Turing followed analytic philosophers who believed that the world and the mind, they work through strict mathematical logic. They basically, among other things, believed that only the objective physical world exists. They weren't super into ideas like the soul or the emotions. So intelligence then that basically handles zeros and ones is a problem solver. And that's all fine when we're talking about an Excel spreadsheet. But when we use the word intelligence and ascribe it to problem solving and manipulating data, it's an awfully narrow definition. It excludes, for example, moral, aesthetic, and spiritual reasoning. It limits it to an awfully cold, formal sense of intelligence that it assumes no meaningful relationship of the mind to the world that it's knowing. As a contrast, think of how the Bible says that Abraham knew his wife Sarah in marital relations. Additionally, AI assumes that the whole world can be represented in data. Dreyfus, the philosopher, calls this the ontological assumption. And it says that the world is basically composed of zeros and ones already. And these can be endlessly manipulated. This, of course, lends an immense scope of potential of knowledge for AI, and seemingly it could devour all of the data in the universe, know everything in its entirety, and attain godlike knowledge, or at least Wikipedia-level knowledge. But of course, there's lots of things in life that can't be represented in data, like love. What's an alternative view? Maximus the Confessor, for example, understands the intellect to include two things. It's the mind, the nous in Greek, and it's the reason, dianoia. By reason, he means practical reason. Practical reason operates horizontally. This is how we solve problems in the world. This is how we learn how to cook things, for example. This is how we do math. Practical reason also works in a second dimension of depth within us. It's how we regulate our passions and our desires. You could say that practical reason is for day-to-day life. By nous, though, he means the faculty of contemplation. It's mystical silence that he's referring to, by which we commune with beauty, truth, and especially God. And it's this contemplative faculty that makes human intelligence three-dimensional. It's by which we look upward with our whole being, opening up to greater realities. So right away, we can see that the Silicon Valley definition of intelligence incorporates only one dimension of what Maximus teaches. And this is not to mention the fact that it imagines no body for that intelligence to inhabit. So AI operates with a one-dimensional, instrumental sense of intelligence. It's divorced from all the qualities that give life its texture, the passions, the virtues, and generally meaning. And of course, Maximus does not believe that the world is composed of data. That's not what's at the center of the world. His vision, rather, is that everything in the cosmos, everything visible, like this room, and everything invisible, like love, these are revelations of the Logos. They're revelations of Christ. So when the intellect comes to know anything, really, it is coming to know the Logos. It is coming to know Christ. By contrast, Silicon Valley imagines knowledge as depositing a bunch of zeros and ones into your cerebrum. A second field of concern: the self and how it relates to others in relationships. Does consciousness matter? In 1950, Alan Turing proclaimed this question too meaningless to deserve discussion. What counts, he says, instead, is an imitation game. Can a computer dialogue with us so we can't tell the difference between a human? Can a computer trick us into interpreting its behavior as coming from a conscious agent? It's called the Turing test. You maybe have heard of AI therapists, or you heard of the recent story of this 14-year-old boy who tragically took his own life after discussions with a chatbot. It matters when AI appears to be social. Consciousness, rather, it comes from a term knowing, or meaning knowing with. We're never just floating intelligences that are detached from relationships with others, much less with the world. We're always engaged together in meaningful activities. It's what makes relationships and self-gift possible. Again, Abraham knew his wife Sarah, and together they knew their son Isaac. And our third field of concern: what does it mean to be human? I know, big question. As Walker Percy has put it, we could explain every fact in the universe and yet remain clueless about how to live at 2 p.m. or 11 a.m. on a Wednesday. The thing is, what matters is precisely how to live at 11 a.m. on a Wednesday. Attend a lecture at a university, succumb to depression and take to alcohol, attend faithfully to our schoolwork. In other words, we live for meaning, values, and ends. A brain in a vat or an AI algorithm, they don't have that. Let's take this discussion into today's technomedicine. Medicine has long taken the bait on each of these three fronts over the last century. Intelligence is already restricted to manipulating data, and patients are already reduced to data. Instead of personal relationships that structure medicine, we have impersonal systems that are anonymous, that pretend to care. And the only meaning that we seem to have left in medicine is efficiency. Now, let me be clear. What follows is certainly a critique of medicine. It's a critique of how it generally works today. I do have to defend my profession at least a little bit and say most doctors don't really like the way that things are at the present. And so most would agree with me, at least to some extent, with what follows. When I refer to today's technomedicine, I mean each of these three areas of concern in concert together. I don't just mean all of our collective fancy technologies we have to work on our bodies. To use Paul Kingsnorth's language, today in healthcare, we encounter not patients, doctors, and nurses. We encounter the machine. That's technomedicine. Historically speaking, the medicine that I practice today is honestly almost a whole different profession than what William Osler practiced even 100 years ago. It may be superior in treating many diseases. I'm sure glad we don't have smallpox anymore, but inferior in a number of other ways. So the machine, it's a metaphor for the countless number of parties in healthcare that each operate according to these three fields of concern that I'm going to outline here. You might be thinking, time out there, medical technologies, they're just tools to help us do more for suffering people. I don't deny that. The ventilator has certainly done this. People with respiratory failure before the ventilator, they just died. Now they don't. But ventilators also change how we approach medicine more generally. Now when I walk into a room as the doctor, I am trained to look at the machine to tell me what is happening in the patient's body, to give me their status of health, as opposed to actually going to the patient's body. There's more to it than just being a tool. So let's talk about each of these three fields in medicine a little more specifically and see how it overlaps with how AI is already structured. So, intelligence. We all think of doctors as tending to the patient in their lived and broken embodiment. The focus of knowledge is the human body, such that the quintessential encounter between doctor and patient, it starts with a narrative history of meaning and moves on to a physical exam. However, the days of this sacred doctor-patient relationship are over. Doctors are technicians now, unfortunately. For a while, we were technicians to the patient's body. It was like we, the mind, were trying to fix the parts of the broken body. But now this has been rearranged again. We're still technicians, but we're technicians in service of a much larger, suffocating machine, the healthcare system. Now, instead of the doctor-patient relationship, what we have is the machine-data relationship. Like most medical students, I was implicitly trained to see the eye patient, the electronic chart, because this is what contained the real objective information: vital signs, blood tests, CT scans. We've even turned CT scanners into a tongue-in-cheek joke. We call it the donut of truth. And the main piece, it seems, that we doctors bring to the table in medicine today is reducing the patient into empiric data that we can then shuffle them through the assembly line of modern healthcare. In other words, doctors are forced to service not patients so much as invisible and ever-present systems. Just think, how much time have you spent staring at the backside of your own doctor while they're on a computer? As we said with Silicon Valley, intelligence is already reduced to manipulating data, and patients are reduced to that data. What this amounts to is nothing short of a worldview. In the words of Byung-Chul Han, the digital regime says, being is information. Technology reveals truth, and it reveals it as data. It reveals the patient as essentially a data mine. Think of it this way: technology mediates almost everything that we do in medicine today. It's become a stance that we already strike towards the world. It's a whole mode of being and how we do things. So what I'm saying is, in the sense that the Middle Ages were Christian, today's medicine is technological. Our next field of concern: relationships and consciousness. We usually idealize medicine as occurring in the context of personal relationships between people. There could be relationality, self-gift. In medicine today, though, I think it doesn't take much imagination to think of how this has been eroded. Instead of dynamic personal relationships of care, we structure medicine to provide some abstract version of care. It's become anonymous. The patient could be anyone, the doctor could be anyone. In fact, the doctor may as well already be an AI algorithm. And then our third field of concern, meaning. Earlier I said that the only meaning we seem to have left is efficiency. And that's partially true. That's partially true. What grounds this efficiency that we have in medicine, as well as in AI for that matter, is a sort of mythos of technological progress. It goes something like this. Once upon a time, we were poor, nasty, life was poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Religion and traditional social structures prevented mankind from free rational thought, the kind that would allow us to use knowledge to have power to relieve the human estate. Science was off limits, in other words. But having shaken off our former ways, we become enlightened. We become the true masters of nature who enjoy endless improvement in our material lives. We eradicated smallpox. We invented the ventilator. We believe technology has solved or will solve every problem that we face. As David Noble points out, technology has effectively become its own religion. Technology is transcendence. In conquering nature, it strives to overcome its limits. And our faith in technomedicine means that we seem to believe that we'll achieve some sort of utopia on earth where there's no suffering, no sorrow, no pain, and no death. You could think, for example, of all of the almost hysteria back and forth about COVID policies, how powerful those narratives were in one direction or the other. Technomedicine aims to redefine what it means to be human, what it means to suffer an illness, and what it means to use medicine. Now, you might be thinking, AI actually just presents a wonderful opportunity to make healthcare human again. Maybe products like DAX can write notes for doctors so we don't have to do it. That will free us up to have more time to actually spend it with patients and have a human touch with them. Point certainly well taken, and I hope that that is the case. I worry, though, that this doesn't actually address the three areas of concern that we've been outlining and following here in terms of what it means to be human. Let's get a little bit more tangible. Let's talk about a couple examples of AI. I suspect most of you heard about Father Justin, the AI chatbot who was released a few months ago and quickly laicized. The uproar was swift when it offered absolution of sins and taught heresy. The danger, though, it lies not so much with whether the chatbot provides accurate information per se. The danger is much more serious than this. It radically misunderstands the meaning of the priesthood, the Christian life, the church. It makes each of these into a technical simulacra, an imitation of the firm realities of grace, repentance, and the body of Christ. Not to mention the way it demeans a person's suffering to have it addressed by a robot. Hebrews 4:15 says, "We do not have a high priest, Christ, who's unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who in every respect has been tempted as we are, yet without sin." AI cannot sympathize with our weaknesses no matter how smooth its answers may seem. Father Justin can never approach the same category as Father Dan, much less Saint Justin the martyr. It can only present the imitation of a priest. And this makes a nice analogy for medicine if you can imagine what Dr. Justin would do to the meaning of illness and medicine. Let's give a positive AI example. First, the bionic pancreas. This device was approved by the FDA in 2022. It was approved to treat diabetes after a research trial showed that it was superior to the prior generation of insulin pumps. It won by an impressive margin, too. Similar to the old pumps, patients wear the bionic pancreas, and it gives them insulin. It knows how much insulin to give them because it's paired up with a continuous glucose monitor that's constantly measuring blood sugar. Blood sugar goes into the device gives patient insulin. Now, the old pumps, they required pretty complex insulin infusion regimens to be programmed onto the device, so it knew what to do with all this data that was coming at it. So it knew what to do with all the blood sugars. This required awfully close contact with a diabetes specialist in order to titrate the insulin doses and was quite dangerous if done incorrectly. The bionic pancreas, however, learns to adjust insulin doses automatically based on the patient's prior needs. The only thing that the patient has to enter into the device is their body weight. That is pretty remarkable. No carbs have to be put in it because it learns almost how to be your pancreas for you. No doubt this will help prevent the myriad of diabetic complications, especially for children: vision loss, heart disease, neuropathy, etc. Let's contrast this with an example from my field of palliative medicine. Today, there's numerous AI applications in development to improve pain assessment and management. Could pain become another domain for AI to take over? Here, though, we must recognize an essential difference between what blood sugar is and what pain is. Blood sugar, it's a purely empirical data point. The number of blood sugar is a direct symbolic representation of serum blood sugar. The concept perfectly matches the reality, you could say. Data points for pain, however, facial expressions, heart rate, they don't work the same way. A grimace itself is not pain. Increased heart rate itself is not pain. Surely these are phenomena that manifest pain to us, but they aren't pain themselves. The current definition of pain wisely, there's an official definition, it wisely defines it as a conscious experience. It's not an objective number just like blood sugar that's waiting for an instrument in order to measure it, and it's not just some subjective feeling that we have no way of knowing. This is to say, no matter how accurately we think we can measure pain with a device, the data is so distant from the reality of pain that it becomes almost meaningless. The alternative that is threatened by this is pain's meaningfulness. In palliative care, we tend to call this total pain. It's an acknowledgement that pain, it's a rich and textured experience. As some have said, pain is the start of poetry. Such meaning of pain is only appreciable by conscious experience and sharing in that pain. Because I am human and also subject to pain, I can understand at least a little bit what a patient goes through who has pain. That's totally inaccessible to a machine. This also has other deleterious effects, like excluding the psychosocial and spiritual dimensions of pain, as well as reducing pain overall from a personal, cultural reality that demands a compassionate human touch to a technical problem to solve. Dr. Warner Slack of Harvard Medical School, I think he was onto something when he said the following. I suspect he wasn't aware of the depth of his statement, though. If a physician can be replaced by a computer, then he or she deserves to be replaced by a computer. He was probably expressing the common view that the test of whether AI should be able to do something in society is whether it works as well as a human. On a deeper level, though, it reveals how much medicine has already been degraded. Doctors already act like computers, or at least like little inefficient technicians. The example of pain, though, sheds a different light on the true meaning of illness and the purpose of medicine. So I think we can begin to see some of the hazards that AI poses to medicine as a rich human response to the reality of suffering and call to provide compassion. In many instances, AI, it offers the imitation of medicine, yet another attempt to absorb mankind into the machine. I worry that technomedicine and AI have long already been ideological bedfellows, according to these three fields. I've tried to present an alternative today that can hopefully bring some clarity to what we can reasonably expect out of AI. I hope that it can open up a middle ground between looking at AI as either salvation on the one hand or our destruction on the other hand. A space where we can critically discern algorithms from the posture of St. Albert the Great. Absent a firm sense of what it means to be human, though, I expect us to get more of the same out of medicine when it becomes taken over by AI. An encounter not so much as between doctor and patient as between machine and data, impersonal anonymous systems, and pseudo-transcendence through AI. We're liable to see AI as doom or salvation. Skip this one. So what do we do about it? How do we go about being human in a solved world? I have no quick fixes for you. I'll offer us just one point to get us started and wrap up our time together this morning. That one point is be a Luddite. Be a Luddite. Though turning off social media, unsubscribing from the news, and canceling your streaming subscriptions are maybe good places to start, I mean something more substantive. When you do use AI or other technology, use them like an icon that manifests beauty, truth, and goodness. Icons lead beyond themselves. They lead to something better. They don't lead back into obsession or addiction with the object. In other words, place your value in embodied sacramental activities in the world over technological ones in virtual reality. Put as simple as possible, as Mother Teresa might put it, love God and neighbor. Pray and do works of mercy. Humans can never be replaceable across the spectrum of caregiving. Doctors, nurses, nurse aides, all of you. All of us as human are called to offer care for the body and compassion for suffering. With friendship, the ancients defined it as those who stand by each other in times of trial. With marriage, we take vows in sickness and in health. With our parents, the commandments in most cultures teach us to honor thy father and mother. And with our children, we change their dirty diapers and rock them to sleep. These actions are like medicine to our souls. They will correct over time each of the three fields of concern we've been tracking. Encountering suffering people forces our mind not to reduce them to a data point. We begin to perceive something greater in them. This also forces us to form personal relationships with them. And doing so, we begin to learn the deeper meanings of illness and healing. They teach us patience, humility, offering help. In other words, the real meaning of illness and medicine, an alternative, is sacramental. Walker Percy, one of my favorite authors, shows this wonderfully in his apocalyptic novel, Love in the Ruins. The protagonist, Dr. Thomas More, he's a psychiatrist, a doctor of the soul, who's described as a bad Catholic at a time near the end of the world. He falls into a midlife crisis. He becomes depressed and takes to alcohol. He experiences delusions of grandeur that he is going to save the modern world from its spiritual illnesses. To that end, he creates a device that he calls the ontological lapsometer. It's a stethoscope of the soul. He's going to fix our spiritual illnesses. He aspires to save mankind through technology, in other words. He allows the device to fall into the wrong hands, though, and it ultimately unleashes catastrophe on the very community that he had hoped to save. In this sense, the story is a technocratic tragedy. Dr. Thomas More, he identified the right problem, but came up with the wrong solution. AI can be quite similar, such as with the need for better pain assessment in medicine. In the story, Dr. More, he's humiliated, he's humbled. In the end, though, he finds his own healing sacramentally. First, he settles down into a very average, stable marriage and has more children. And second, he returns to the church through confession. The story has him donning sackcloth and ashes at midnight mass for Christmas in repentance for his sins. He doesn't exactly become a better person. He still is tempted by all the same old vices. But his outlook and pattern of life change toward embracing embodied modes of daily life. Percy shows that the deepest meaning of medicine is sacramental. Healing of the body is an analogy for healing of the soul. Medicine, it ought to be an icon of the tree of life through which we may re-enter paradise. There's a fatal flaw in all mankind living outside our heavenly paradise. And this touches every aspect of how we do medicine and how we meet patients. An AI algorithm that tries to correct this itself is much like Dr. Moore's lapsometer. It can only do so by demoralizing its subjects in the process. In the book's sequel, Dr. Moore says medicine works by venturing into the heart of darkness, which is to say by talking and listening, mostly listening, to another troubled human for months. What he means is that medicine is a sacrament where the experience of illness, suffering, seeking help, offering compassion, these participate mysteriously in higher patterns in nature, in Scripture, the life of Christ, and ultimately God's providence. In it, God is working out the salvation of patient and doctor alike. Doctor and patient, in other words, are co-exiles, trying to make their way back to paradise when they meet in a clinical encounter. Medical technologies can be a part of this, but only when we stop treating them like a route to either our salvation or our destruction. Thank you.